So, welcome to yet another episode, and today we have a fascinating conversation lined up ahead of us because we have with us a special guest, Premprasad Mirthinti, and he brings with himself a very different sort of background, not what we have been used to on our platform. We normally have a lot of people from corporates, but Prem is somebody who's worked with the top academicians of the world and has had the honor of working with Nobel laureates and has, of course, very strong and pointed views about the state of education. And in fact, he's dedicated his life to the purpose of bringing about improvements in the in the field of STEM education. But let me not steal his thunder. So, Prem, welcome to the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Rajiv. It was a pleasure meeting you, and it's pleasure having you talking to you on this forum. So thanks a lot for inviting me in the first place, and
Right.
thanks for a very kind introduction. You've been more than kind to me. So
No, it's sometimes you do not realize the value of the work you're doing
it's
because
a process, isn't it? We just
yes.
do. We just do what we are supposed to and what we feel that we should do,
Mhm.
without really uh, with a particular materialistic purpose in it. You feel that's what I feel actually. Really, uh, comes out as a good business model. Something you really pursue as a passion, and that's what actually translates into something, a real contribution to the society as well, which is sustainable
Right.
uh, in a sense. When you do it with a purpose, which serves yourself and the rest of the communities as well. So that's where I
Right.
feel that we have a we can build a very sustainable model. So
Right. Yeah,
that's
and
what I'm driven by.
yeah, absolutely. And speaking of sustainable models, I realized when I spoke to you last time
Yeah,
that you stay in a small town called
that's right.
Sandur, right?
Sandur, yeah,
So,
yeah.
tell us about yourself, your background, and why you chose to stay here in a small town, and is it primarily driven by the pandemic, or is it more of a quasi-permanent sort of decision? I'm quite intrigued, and I'm sure the listeners would also want to hear about that.
Yeah, it is actually. I was in Bombay actually, just before the pandemic, and the project that I'm working on right now on STEM education, I actually started in Bombay, and then just around the time, just I think about 6 months before the pandemic actually came, there was no news about pandemic then. I decided to move to my place, to my native, because I did see a few things about. This is what actually I feel about, which I'll also connect to the education, to the broader education system later on. Perhaps if we touch those points in the conversation. But coming back to this, I myself actually felt a bit constrained to the extent that I was taking daily flights to different parts of the country. At least 3 to 4 flights in a week, or every fortnight. And to the extent that I was I was working as vice president sales for a company involved uh, in high power lasers, and of course also low power lasers. So as I said, I'm a laser technologist.
Mhm.
But then a career like that, I never felt that it really, suits me. While it was exciting, it was a jet set career. It wasn't something that I really wanted to be in for the long term. You know, it wasn't something that there were MBAs, there were people, who are better qualified than me to do that particular job. At the end of the day, what matters is whether you bring in the sales to
Right.
the company. Of course, that's very important. When you're dedicated to that job. But I felt in that job I wasn't really, serving the purpose that
Mhm.
I really meant to serve. I really wanted to pursue in my life. When I was studying, when I was a student, the kind of changes that I always innately felt that I should bring about.
Hmm.
that I have to stand for. So that passion has been driving me for a very long time. It was quite innate, it never had expressed itself uh, adequately for me to embark on my entrepreneurial journey. And
Right.
then after a year of working at Bombay, I felt that in one of the things that it was the travel. And it's also about how if I had to access children in Bombay, for example, they come back from school 5:30 in the evening. It's very hard for them to. I could not really conduct classes in my flats. I could not really test my model. I could not. There were lots of constraints. If you are already big and if you are already capable of renting huge office spaces and maker spaces and all these things, I think living in cities are quite advantageous. So that was the time that I actually felt that we do have quite a big house, quite a large establishment in my hometown. So why don't I move back to
Hmm.
my? I was born and brought up here. I've always been very passionate about this. I went to Bombay purely because I had a job there. Of course, Bombay is a very fabulous city. Before that I was in Chennai. That's a fabulous city as well. I have family connections with it.
Right.
So and when I started, I thought I'll stay here for a while. Then in case it doesn't work out, I go out. And I think there was no reason for me to go out at all. And then
Right.
I decided that I even incorporate my company here. And a lot of people actually, when I spoke to them, they said, "No, you should not register your company in your hometown. It has to be, when you go to your client, when you go to an investor, when you go to your mentor, they say,
Right.
where are you from? You know,
Right.
so, Sandur is a place. It sounds so. I don't know how a place sounds itself backward, but
Right.
I can't really. But I think it's all in the mind. So people, it
Right.
should. I felt it's that, just imagine, when I traveled to Oxford. Oxford is a small village. Cambridge is a small village.
Right.
Hull, the place where I studied, is a small village.
Hmm.
And uh, what kind of excellence prevails in Oxford?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, one of the things that I always actually tend to discuss with a lot of academics that I meet is when we do talk about the rural
Hmm.
areas. What is it that prevents the rural areas in India from pursuing excellence?
Hmm.
There are some good schools. I have been a beneficiary of a great school as well. I'll tell you a little more about it later. But then why is it that the migration to the cities is so? You know, it is people are compelled to migrate to the city when there is when there's a lot that we could actually be doing in our quite sustainably in our hometowns.
Correct.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying that people should not migrate.
Right.
Obviously, cities have the demand for people.
Yeah.
But I think to create an ecosystem, to create a knowledge ecosystem in small places, would be a far more sustainable way of actually not only to educate the people but also to create uh, an ecosystem of innovation, which is far more creative than what you would be able to do in cities.
Right.
Uh, and the reason is not only about the availability of the people, but also it is the availability of a lot of quietness. If you
Correct.
go to Princeton, the Princeton Institute of Advanced Study that was particularly created for Einstein, and
Hmm.
now some of the top-rated scientists in the world, in particular in physics and math, they work there. It's a small place to quite cut off from the rest of the humanity. Uh,
Right.
you know, so what does it tell you? Innovators really work in, you know, will have to work in that kind of uh, silent bliss,
Right.
which is where the mind really activates
Hmm.
in the finest this one. And Sandur is quite a picturesque town. It was the seat of it's mentioned in Kalidasa's Vega Sandesha,
Okay.
and one of the oldest Sanskrit works.
Hmm.
And it has historical temples here, not as famous as Tirupati, not at all as famous as, but no less. Some of the finest architectures, and not very far from, just about 30 kilometers away from the ruins of the Vijayanagar Empire.
Right.
Just about 30 to 40 kilometers. So it's the setting here is pretty good. It's
Hmm.
and there aren't any short of school. We aren't any short of schools to test our programs, to see
Right.
to to see how children respond to this kind of programs. To talk to the people. There are a lot of people who are well educated here. There are a
Hmm.
lot of people who really believe. But whether they do get the opportunities, whether their children get the opportunities, is a big question mark. Are
Right.
we translating the resources that are available here into human as well as material resources
Right.
into a into a into excellence in pursuit of
Right.
excellence? That's a question mark.
Yeah.
I think there isn't a organized commitment towards it in order to do
Hmm.
that. Yeah,
Right. Yeah, and as you mentioned, in order for the country or the world at large to be sustainable, we cannot have incessant migration from rural areas to urban areas because the urban
absolutely.
infrastructure is already crumbling, and with the kind of population density that we have, particularly in urban areas, it's
Yes.
absolutely not sustainable, and we do bear the brunt of it, every day. It's just
Yeah.
that the urban population is kind of used to it, so they do not realize it, and they probably do not go and stay and work out of the rural areas or the less congested areas to know what peace and quiet is like, the kind that
What
you
peace
are
and quiet is
experiencing.
like exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'll tell you something. Actually, the comment that you just made reminds me of a poem that we had in class 10th. It's called, I think, not a poem, but I think it was a prose, a lesson in English. It was
Mhm.
called The Deserted Village.
Okay.
Where people tend to migrate away from their homes and from their villages.
Right.
Set in London, set in England,
Yeah.
during the Industrial Revolution, and they
Correct.
go to cities, and then in
Hmm.
cities everything is uniform
Right.
and everything is very unnatural because all the houses are whitewashed white,
Yeah.
and all the houses are you know uh, they're designed the same. There
Hmm.
isn't when people are used to. I used to feel the same way. I was living in. I wasn't in any less of a luxury in Mumbai. I was in. I was in the Palava city, the smart city. And it
Hmm.
was really very good. It was, but every single house is the same. With all the beauty that's imposed on you, you
Yeah.
still want to go back and surrender yourself to the natural settings that you originate from.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's
that
true.
you always want to go back to the cradle. The ground
Yeah.
zero is there,
Yeah.
and that the temptation to reach back home is always
Yeah.
something that uh,
I
that
guess
is good.
we as a race tend to blame the lack of opportunities, but when you come to think of it, opportunities are essentially created by people like us only. It's not
They're created by
some
people like this.
some
Yeah,
nature will create opportunities uniformly distributed across the entire lay of the land. It
yes,
is people like us who create these opportunities,
yeah,
and what you said about the registered office is a classic example. It's
yeah,
nothing but a perception that a office registered in, say, a Mumbai or a Bangalore or a Delhi or New York or London or Singapore for that matter is perceived to be a better organization than an organization, say, which is registered in Sandur. Whereas
yeah.
there is absolutely no logic for that.
There's no
In
logic.
fact, you have a lot of natural advantages as a small organization.
Yeah,
If you're set up in a smaller place, more space, more opportunities, or rather more quiet opportunities to kind of jog your mind and
yeah.
do much more.
Yeah. Just one more before we uh, move
Hmm.
on. I was asking a friend of mine who was a PhD, a colleague, who was a fellow uh, in one of the previous companies that I worked for. We were also selling lasers then. I was a product manager, and he was one too. And this guy was telling me, he had his PhD in laser physics,
Hmm.
and he was telling me, you know, Fred, you know about so many books on so many different subjects in physics and other areas. Having studied in a big city, and certainly one of the brilliant guys that I have met, and in my field, certainly was highly knowledgeable. I never read as many books as you could. That's because in fact, we don't have a habit of reading books in cities. In a
Hmm.
lot of people, is one of the things that actually inhibits people from reading, is because the
Hmm.
travel time for children from going from place A to B, by the
Right.
time they come back, they are zombies.
Yeah.
And it's not. I'm not saying that this should be a limitation for the children. There are ways to overcome that. That got me
Hmm.
thinking as well. Yes, as to what could we do to get the children to actually read.
Yeah.
Because it's ultimately, the final source of inspiration comes from reading. When you discover things on your own,
Right.
there's a lot more to knowledge and innovation than reading. But reading is the place where you actually cultivate those
Hmm.
the ideals.
Right.
Understand understand your peers, understand. You get the references in your field, or it makes you a very broad and eclectic thinker.
Right.
uh, Really is. And
Yeah.
a lot of students these days lack that habit.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm looking at doing something as well. There are some startups actually which are focused on reading,
Hmm. Right.
but it should be like a toy reading, like you have some pocket books for children. Children will
Right.
have to resort to
Hmm.
serious reading beyond the textbooks, beyond the notes,
Correct.
for the sake of it. You know,
Yeah.
that's the hallmark of a curious mind, as Feynman says.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's unfortunate that, we've seen a massive dumbing down of the, entire population, not just of children, but of adults alike. And
Yeah,
people don't want to read. And, we get fascinated by these things, these studies which say that the attention span of man in today's generation is like 8 seconds, is less than that of a, goldfish and all that. But,
yeah.
it is all about application of mind. I'm sure, anybody who has an attention span of 8 seconds, if they apply themselves to a task, they can certainly increase their attention span. It's not that, genetically we have deteriorated to have a 8-second attention span.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, I think as a society we have not. While we may not have deteriorated genetically, but
But
we certainly have behaviorally.
behaviorally,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. Behaviorally, I'm afraid because
Yeah,
there are some theories in evolutionary biology, because you brought in this thing that
right.
about genetically we have deteriorated. That culture and behavior, do influence, the genetic evolution.
Right.
So I'm afraid, the kind of things
That
will.
we are at the risk of
Yeah,
genetic
we
degradation.
are, that's, because obviously, it's a survival of the fittest,
Yeah,
and through natural selection.
right.
So yeah, I'm afraid. So, I hope that that particular part of the evolutionary
Yeah,
Darwinism is not right.
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, let's hope for the best. But let's segue from reading into education, which
sure.
is,
Yeah,
and curiosity and some
yeah,
of the broader aspects.
yeah,
So what you're doing right now in the area of STEM education, I'm sure stems a lot, pun intended,
yeah.
from your experiences of education, and you've done quite a lot of things which, of course, may be too technical for the average person to absorb. But tell us a little bit about what you've done, what your experience has been working with the leading universities in the UK, and what is it that you want to bring back, from those experiences and create
Yeah.
in the form of STEM education right now for the youth of the country and for the children of the country.
Yeah, see, I'm actually a mechanical engineer. I graduated in mechanical engineering from Kuvempu University in Karnataka. I studied at Bapuji College in Davangere. Okay, which is about 4 hours from Bangalore, 3 or 4 hours from Bangalore. And then I wasn't doing anything for a couple of years. I was just exploring the things the way any normal uh, person who's graduated would do. A lot of people used to, because I wasn't. I tried my hand at working for a startup in those days, which was into knowledge management. But
Hmm.
it was very interesting, but we were not very sure, what. At least I wasn't very sure actually where it was going to end up at. So that was the time that I decided to go abroad and
Hmm.
try my hand at. And I applied to UK, and it was. I always had an interest in doing some niche areas, and
Right.
physics was always. Although I studied mechanical engineering, physics has always been a first love to me. You know, so I decided when I went to UK, there was a very good interdisciplinary program conducted by the physics department called uh, laser processing. It was laser technology applications for the industry. So
Mhm.
I switched my branch from materials engineering to laser technology, and then what I knew next was that I had an opportunity to study under some of the finest people at Hull. Hull was a pioneer in laser physics. It's a small university, but a very traditional university. Most of us really can relate to Hull through Venn diagrams.
Mhm.
When you know, so when you as you enter the Hull University, you see a building called you know Venn Building that's named after who's from
Okay.
that place, and lots of other many other celebrities and many other scholars came from Hull, including Brimmer Jones, who did some pioneering work on liquid crystals, and many such great people. So I did my masters there, and did an interesting thesis on under one of my under my supervisor David Sachs on laser processing of semiconductors. That was the time when I had an opportunity to understand how lasers are, how certain niche areas of manufacturing, specialized areas of, I wouldn't call them niche, but they're very specialized manufacturing techniques. That this kind of technologies are not at all available in India for industrial purposes. They're there in academia.
Right.
Industry hardly has any sense of it. That's because we lack a whole uh, ecosystem of semiconductor technology in the country or photonics technology. There are some use cases, but it's not much.
Right.
Uh, but then my interest in research continued, and I developed a further fascination for physics. So I continued to study in Hull for a while, but then I moved to Manchester a little later with my own research proposal on a topic that was published recently in an area called ultra low temperature physics. And that was the time when Manchester was doing extremely well. It still is doing great, actually. And they had just discovered a new material called graphene.
Mhm.
And the discovery was made by Konstantin Navaslibo and Professor Andrew Guy. And the Professor Guy was the head of the department. I wrote to another physicist called Professor Andrew Gola, who was a professor of low temperature physics, because that was the field in which I was actually interested in. And he was a fabulous man, one of the finest. I'm still in touch with him. So he's one of the finest gentlemen that I've seen, and one of the finest persons in that sub area of physics.
Mhm.
So I went to him, and so he liked me, and what I knew was 6 months down the line, I was at Manchester doing my graduate research, working on a topic called super solidity. Super solidity is basically about solids showing some kind of a quantum behavior and then flowing as if they are liquids. Okay, so
Okay.
that's a
Mhm.
so it's called a non-classical inertia. But what's important about that is not the research topic itself, but the kind of technologies that I used in order to, as an engineer, although despite my interest in physics, anything that I do, I always have this. Anything that I always look in terms of what could be done about it. Do we have it in our country?
Mhm.
Uh, you know, do we study this kind of a thing? So that and I had an opportunity to rebuild one of the experiments that was already in place, but we had to rebuild it quite extensively to adopt the thing, and that's called a dilution refrigerator.
Mhm.
And I gained a terrific amount of experience working on that for nearly 2 years.
Mhm.
And it so happens now that the dilution refrigerator is now used in quantum computing.
Okay.
In fact, I'm in discussions with a few people to do something about it. I don't really want to talk about it, right
Mm.
now. Maybe
Right.
in the next conversation that we have, we probably will be talking about it. But we are exploring as to what we could do
Mhm.
that beyond STEM education.
Right.
But this is more about creating the subsystems
Mhm.
for quantum computing in the to develop. that technology in India, so that as you see, today we have a very large IT industry, but
Yeah.
India doesn't really, except for a few institutes and a few computer scientists, we don't really have a very large ecosystem of computer science discoveries happening in this country.
Right.
We don't have really have. We have
Right.
fallen behind in supercomputing. We don't really have anything happening either in the hardware or semiconductors or even in quantum computing. Of course, there are some companies in India which are doing some good work. There
Mhm.
are about 7 or 8 startups in quantum computing.
Right.
But as far as the hardware itself is concerned, there's not much happening. You know,
Right.
that requires a lot
Yeah.
of investment. That requires lot of. So how do we create the subsystems? How do you create the
Hmm.
ancillaries? How do you create
Right.
this one to actually build this that go not the quantum computer itself,
Hmm.
but if you have a car industry, you will have from brake liners uh, you know uh, to carbon black. All these serve the automotive industry, right? So
Correct.
similarly, you have such kind of ecosystem one needs to create.
Hmm.
The thing. So I felt this was one of the interesting technology that we can actually bring it back to India and
Right.
develop it. It so happens that there are experts in India, very few experts in India,
Hmm.
and as an engineer, I certainly want to get into it, and I'm talking to a few people doing it alongside
Right.
the STEM program that I'm doing.
Right.
But in any case, okay, in continuing my Manchester story, I was also a tutor at Manchester. I was taking workshops for the students under my supervisor, and I was taking classes. I also worked in a local college as a lecturer teaching the mechanical engineering.
Okay.
So that was a very interesting experience, to see uh, you know how how students are actually trained, uh, whether in physics or in engineering, how they are trained for careers.
Yeah.
What matters. It isn't that they are not they have no emphasis on knowledge. After all, this country has created a lot of knowledge. much of much of the industrial revolution and later developments, a lot of it came from England, whether we like it or not. That's something
Right.
that we still have the world's best universities.
Hmm.
But when you look
Right.
at the syllabi, you look at that, it isn't about cramming through notes after notes and papers after papers
Hmm.
to
Right.
get through an examination. I've seen some of the top academics how they recruit their PhD students. They
Right.
don't recruit the students based on their they are not diehard fans of academic merit.
Right.
They don't look at. I'm not saying that marks are completely discounted.
Hmm.
Marks do show that you have applied certain efforts.
Right.
But what more beyond that? How do you? It isn't that there are about 100,000 students competing for an exam, and about 10,000 students qualify, and then out of that you can only select 1,000 people,
Yeah.
say for a place in IIT. It's a very different thing. The professor gets to know the student. He can do an internship under him. He can do he can do a small project, a project in computing under him for 15 days or 20 days. Understand,
Hmm.
how research works. It doesn't matter what his marks are at the end of the day.
Right.
What matters is, whether he really has the aptitude for
Hmm.
research, because
Right.
for any as a custodian of that research field, every academic has a responsibility to make sure that their research field continues
Right.
and have
Yeah.
so I'm not an academic I'm not an academic now, but you know but then this has actually influenced my thoughts later on. That's why I'm emphasizing all
Hmm.
these things.
No,
And
absolutely.
yeah, so obviously the guy, he looks at the students. It's suppose say you imagine you train a PhD student based on his marks in a GATE or a CAT or one of these exams, and he does a PhD in astrophysics, and then he jumps into a job in investment banking.
Hmm.
Then I think in a way the professor might feel that that he has failed in his responsibility and his duty that he has
Right.
towards that particular subject area. Who's going to
Right.
carry out? I mean, it's a personal wish for anybody to get into the fields that they want to get in. But
Right.
what of the investments that this community has made, the university has made? What of the contribution that they
Hmm.
have? A very promising young mind has migrated into a field,
Right.
you
Hmm.
know, in uh, you know, in which he won't really be able to bring about the kind of impact that he might be making in quantum computing.
Right.
So I think
No,
that
absolutely. And
emphasis actually is very, yeah. Please, yeah,
yeah,
go on.
no, I was saying by that yardstick, a lot of the typical IIT IM combination people in the country
Yeah,
essentially fail to kind of live up to what they were trained for by, moving on from, say, mechanical or chemical or electronics engineering into MBA,
yeah,
and, then either doing iBanking or, selling soaps and credit cards or what have you. Of course, it is
yeah,
their own choice and everybody has a right to choose their career.
yeah,
But at a macro level, certainly the kind of investment in the infrastructure and the limited capacity of seats in, say, mechanical engineering or what have you, they are at least not seeing productive work and productive results to the society
yeah.
coming out of that education system. So
The-
yeah,
yeah.
definitely there is a gap there.
There is a huge gap. What happens is, see, if it's okay if 70-80% of the people are migrating into it, because companies like whether companies like Infosys or the call centers, all the BPOs,
Hmm.
or the various other firms that are operating, these get into the mass requirement of the jobs.
Yeah.
And such jobs exist everywhere. Every country needs that kind of a jobs because not everybody can be an innovator. Uh,
Right.
Physics or engineering, while engineering, we do need a lot of engineers. We only need, we only need a small community of innovators
Hmm.
uh, to
Right.
really bring about the fundamental changes that we need.
Right.
Okay,
Absolutely.
what really is happening is in India, as I see it, a lot of people with a great potential to innovate, a lot of people with the, they tend to move away. Even when they go and study in great universities like Oxford or Harvard, the idea is to actually do something. The idea is not to actually get into science. It's not about, at the end of the day, they're not doing anything. They might be doing something very transformative, like in digital transformation or something. But
Hmm.
fundamental innovation, where is it coming from
Hmm.
in India?
Yeah.
You know, that's something. The path-breaking innovations. When we do not do that kind of innovation, what happens is we don't have a we can only become consumers of innovations rather
Right.
than consumers of technology, rather than the
Right.
creators of it. So we are
Correct.
always at the receiving end of it.
Hmm.
We are
Yeah.
always at the so today there is a huge shortage of semiconductors, and if there's a war like what Russia is, Russia can't get semiconductors now. There's sanctions on them. They don't have a local semiconductor industry. It's a
Right.
different thing that Russia comes from a very different kind of a background. They had, I think, during the Cold War era, they had one of the highest spends on science and technology, uh, even more than the US, and they have almost the all of 21st century science was discovered by the Russians alongside the Europeans and the Americans.
Hmm.
But at the same time, they lagged behind because they never really tried to build industrial complexes around that thing,
Right.
and it was mostly done with a very non-profit way, which demotivated the people, which was
Right.
one of the reasons why the economic collapse of Soviet
Hmm.
Union led to its political collapse.
Right.
But coming back to this topic, this is what my learnings from Manchester, from my education in England, and later on, I moved back to India, and we were, I was at Manipal for a while, and then I moved to industry. I dabbled in the stock markets for a while. I think I did tell you this. Yeah, I was in the, I was trying to model stock markets quite unsuccessfully though, and
Okay.
I was trying to apply some techniques that were quite ahead of. I was quite ahead of my time at that time.
Okay.
It wasn't. I wasn't very successful there.
So
But then,
this is from the fields of laser technology or quantum
yeah,
computing.
yeah,
All of
that's
those
right.
applied to the stock market.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
had
Okay.
studied
Interesting.
some subjects like nonlinear dynamics and non-equilibrium
Mhm.
statistical mechanics,
Okay.
which actually talk about the random box and Brownian motion and
Mm-hmm.
Fibonacci series. which are actually applied in the stock markets.
Okay.
So I was looking at some other advanced techniques
Mm-hmm.
for the stock market modeling. It started as a hobby. It became quite an obsession for quite some time. And then I
Okay.
felt that I wasn't really going anywhere, although I was
Right.
learning and enjoying quite a lot.
Yeah.
I still was while I was investing, I was still using the fundamental analysis, but not my own my own analysis. But
Right.
I decided by then my mind was already made up.
Mm-hmm.
Because with my exposure to the industry and with my exposure to how the industry works and with my exposure to academia, uh, I felt I probably will have to go back to academia and complete my PhD and do something about it there. But then I would be in a rut there. I would be, it would just be for my sake, for the purpose of actually building a career only for my sake, nothing else.
Right.
That wasn't something that I was. It did not really. I did not really see any meaning beyond that.
Yeah.
Paper publications and all that, I wasn't interested. I was. It wasn't something. If it comes my way, it's fine. Even yesterday, somebody was proposing to me that why not we write a joint paper, but it wasn't something that really drives me forward.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of an impact that you can really have. And my this one was we should have. I should have an impact on STEM education
Right.
because when I, as an R&D manager or as general manager or as when I saw people or as vice president for sales, when I
Mm-hmm.
looked at people, when I looked at the youngsters that were coming in, when I looked at even some products from IIT, I felt that I think the engineering programs are not really oriented. They are not really. They are not really. Uh, the students are not really given what they need to know
Mm-hmm.
uh, for the, they go through a lot. They go through a lot of hardship. They work very hard. They really
Right.
try to understand. But at the end of the day, what happens is that learning is very limited. Their learning is very stymied and it's curtailed. So what can we do about it?
Right.
My realization is that I think what we lack is hands-on work experience. What we lack is an experiential learning. What we lack is a skill to deploy knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, you might have a lot of knowledge. You might
Mm-hmm.
understand everything about, say, stock markets, but just go and sit in front of in front of a your you know the uh, the stock market,
The trading
trading
terminal.
platform, a
Yeah.
trading platform. It's a terrific experience.
Right.
It's very intimidating. What to buy, what not to buy. You're swayed by the
Right.
temptations. You're
Mm-hmm.
dragged in. You just spiral and make losses. You make
Right.
a and you might make profit as well, but it's always random. You'll never know what why you have made. And a lot
Right.
of times, my own experience says that when you actually invest in the stock market, I'm just giving you an example. In no way I really want to take the discussion into the stock markets, but when you do spiraling like that, it tells a lot about how things work. We have no control over ourselves. We don't have a
Right.
logic. We are not led by the logic. We actually
Mm-hmm.
go with the bandwagon.
Right.
Okay, and
Yeah.
because we go with the bandwagon, that's where I think creativity fails. That's where I think this is like a prototype for everything else that we do in life. Everything else that happens to a lot of people's lives. Okay, that type of boy has a job in Infosys. He studied in so and so college. He's got so
Right.
many marks. So okay, now my daughter is in class 10 now. Let me
Mm-hmm.
pressurize her. Let me pressurize him to do the
Mm-hmm.
same way to to choose that path.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then what all? So they go to their parents, go to those boys and girls, talk to them. What books you used, what papers you studied,
Mm-hmm.
what guides you studied, what coaching institutes you studied.
Right.
So the chartered path is, you tread the same path again, so that you
Correct.
end up in exactly the thing. That's imitation.
Yeah.
Why don't
Correct.
you allow the child to blossom? Why don't you allow
Mm-hmm.
the, the youngsters uh, to bloom on their own?
Right.
I think creative expression is something when you let the students have their own, express their own ideas. Let them tinker around. Let them learn about Newton's laws. If they are not interested in Newton's laws, let them learn about evolutionary biology. If they are not interested in evolutionary biology, let them learn about music. Let them explore. Let them explore Formula One racing.
Right.
I think all subjects are very eclectic. They are
Yeah.
very, every discipline is connected to another. I think these subjects, what we are only we only divide them. The divisions are
Right.
man-made. Just
Yeah.
as all humanity is one, but we make the schisms, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Buddhism,
Absolutely.
Hinduism, Christianity, Islam.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are schisms that we put like the famous poem of Rabindranath Tagore, where the world is not divided into narrow domestic walls, into that world my father, let my country awake, something like that.
Correct.
Where the mind is without fear. The book
Yeah.
of that famous now. So,
Right.
so, so that's where why do we if from a very young age we chisel the children into, we try to mold their personality for a specific purpose that we have in mind, not their mind. They
Right.
will never. It gets hardened in them. I'm not
Correct.
a psychologist, but this is what I feel.
Yeah. No.
In any case,
Absolutely.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it gets hardened,
Mhm.
and they are hell bent on it, whether they really like it or not, because they have never really, you never really allowed them to discover their own true calling.
Mhm.
You never really allowed them to discover their own instrument. You just tempted them, enticed them into an area
Right.
where, wow, this area is great. This area is, will bring you a job. It will
Mhm.
make you a jet set. It will give you. To look at it, it always looks good. You know,
Yeah.
to see people owning, Ferraris, and that kind of a thing always it always looks good.
Yeah.
But what of your own love? What of your own creativity? I think that's
Correct.
where we really curtail the innovation. It looks like, this is what I feel, that a lot of people, a lot of parents, and a lot of students are really taking that direction in this
Mhm.
country, maybe elsewhere
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
And that's stymies the innovation from the very beginning, or the human resources that we actually need for innovation.
No, absolutely. And in fact, you spoke a little bit about the Industrial Revolution. So if I were to compare the kind of jobs that, let's say, a mainstream engineer is aiming for and what is their dream job, for the most part, these are, most of these jobs are these mass production sort of jobs in the IT industry,
Yeah,
which can be somehow compared to, the job of the kinds
these are
that,
vast
Charlie
productions.
Chaplin used to show and demonstrate in his movies during the Industrial Revolution, right? So it's nothing more than screwing nuts and bolts and being a small cog in the entire wheel or machinery. And
Exactly.
the aspect that somebody needs to design these machines or do some fundamental innovation that can
Bangor,
create
yeah,
new material which can create better machinery. The same way you're talking about semiconductors today, because we do not see such examples in mainstream economy, we cannot relate to it. But I think if people kind of go back to the
yeah, yeah,
industrial age
yeah,
and play the story back, then they
yeah,
will realize where they are heading right now,
right,
and what they are inadvertently doing by going for these so-called high-paying IT jobs after having done whatever, mechanical engineering or chemical engineering or civil engineering or whatever else they are up to.
yeah,
So, but one of the fundamental things that you also spoke about, and which I also observe a lot, which is missing in the society, is that we tend to become consumers rather than becoming creators. And we cannot
exactly, yeah,
become creators unless and until we are curious.
yeah,
Because, a non-curious mind or a non-inquisitive mind, which does not inquire, which does not ask questions, can never really create anything new or do these fundamental innovations, right? Uh,
exactly, yeah,
in,
yeah.
in that respect, coming more to what you are doing and what you are doing in the area of STEM education, how do you bring about that experiential experience of education? Getting people to be curious, getting people to play around with science and technology, and not just coding. That's unfortunately that's become the mainstream image of what hands-on experience means. But yeah, coding is not science, right? So uh,
Yeah, it's
uh,
an important skill to have. It certainly
yeah,
is. As I always mentioned, one has to have those skills to, to use one's knowledge. So
right.
in that respect, I think coding will help you to develop. computational thinking,
Right.
unless your thoughts are only molded towards your securing a job in one of the IT companies. And nothing wrong in IT companies. I think
Yeah.
IT companies have done a tremendous amount of innovation. They have done
No,
a tremendous,
I
but
mean, commercially they have a massive role to play in
they have,
the state that India is at today. There is
yeah, yeah.
absolutely no doubt about it.
Obviously, that's what I'm saying. I want to be very careful here because I'm not really directing at people who already are into it or who really are preparing seriously for that kind of thing. I think those jobs are needed. Uh, I'm talking about people who really want to be scientists and innovators, who really want to be entrepreneurs, who really want to create the ecosystem that's you know and this is for parents who, or even if they want to tread a path in a regular IT company or a regular manufacturing company or a regular thing. If we have, see, one thing I want to say, Rajiv, is the jobs that we've been getting over the last 20 years. These were the excess jobs that came our way because the West did not have enough people to do them. Right?
Right.
They are now upgrading. There is digital transformation of across the board now. Uh, when I was in school, the computers that we know were laptops and desktops. There weren't as many laptops. There weren't laptops, very few, only the desktops. And today we have digital is everywhere. That's digital
Right.
transformation. Okay,
Hmm.
you have digital. You have hundreds of digital devices in your car. You have thousands in aircraft. You have digital devices in washing machine. You have devices in your air conditioner is digitized. Okay, so the world is driven by automation. The world is driven by Industry 4.0. So we are heading into that kind of a digital world now. To to excel and thrive, I think it's for the parents to realize, it's for the academics and for the policymakers to understand. Do we want to continue to be servers of the West, using our brilliant brains just to give them the brains on hire, which is what we've been doing in a major sense?
Hmm.
Or should we should we uh, uh, harness these young minds into doing something on their own? Into molding them into those innovators and helping them discover. Not all may become innovators. Not all may end up doing
Right.
quantum computing or artificial intelligence, or they might
Hmm.
actually go on do something brilliant in music. But so be it.
Right.
That's innovation as well.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
and on that point, just a small bit of clarification or sort of thinking aloud. Even if somebody doesn't become an innovator and discovers or builds the next graphene equivalent, right? But that sort of thought process of how to think differently, how to question things, or how to create, let's say, a new business model in a commercial context, uh, that faculty will be much sharper as compared to somebody who's just going through the motions through rote learning, cracking competitive exams, and
exactly,
getting a cookie cutter job.
bang on again. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I just wanted to say one thing. Like you're just mentioning about graphene. See, I think from what I have seen, I read a lot of books and I have seen some real scientists in action, some of the top ones in the world, and I still interact with a lot of academics from some of the topmost institutions in the country. Uh, what I feel is innovation is not about actually discovering. Discovery is more of a very serendipitous thing. That
Right.
it happens. Uh, you know that you stumble on something. Okay, but innovation can be a process.
Hmm.
Discovery
Yeah.
is an event.
Yeah.
Okay, so but innovation is a process that makes you a better man in whatever you do and
Hmm.
however you do it. Provided
Right.
you're, if you're a, if you're an innovator, it is inevitable that you move up the value chain constantly, regardless of what kind of what kind of a job you're in,
Right.
no matter what your qualifications are.
Hmm.
Whether you work for a courier company, whether you work for a for an IT company or a financial or financial company or a bank. It
Right.
doesn't, or a steel industry, it doesn't matter. Innovation
Right.
will always help you to bring
Hmm.
about that change in your community that
Right.
impacts people's lives positively.
Right. Right.
That impacts people's
Hmm.
ideas and sets
Right.
them an ideal that will be a
Hmm.
benchmark for the next stage of development
Right.
for the rest of your community. So this is what I feel. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, you know, uh, Innovation is like. How does
Yeah.
it come? It comes when you do that, when you pursue that job with passion.
Hmm.
With a sense of uh, you know, you see an ideal setting for yourself in that.
Hmm.
Okay, and when you do that, when you discover that on your own, when
Right.
you know that, not simply because it's providing your daily bread, not
Right.
because you worship it because that's paying you at the end of the day, but
Hmm.
because you really are very, very passionate about it. It
Right.
will. There is a natural movement towards progress in that kind of a atmosphere. So this is what I feel about what
Right.
innovation is. Of course, it can
Right.
lead to great things. It can lead to
Hmm.
great musicians. It can lead to great musical instruments. It can
Right.
lead musical instrumentation as engineering and art.
Right.
Okay, it can lead to great painters. It can
Hmm.
lead to but that's not the thing. The uh, being great, becoming, winning an award, making a discovery. These are events. The
Right.
the process to that, a
Hmm.
lot of people do go through it. There are a lot of
Right.
scientists who have done a terrific amount of work in many different areas in science and
Right.
engineering and medicine.
Hmm. Right.
We don't remember all their names, right? Many
Yeah.
of them might have done equally important. Well, it's only when we go into the details that we start learning, about these things.
Hmm.
But that's a process which eventually resulted in some brash young man or some brash person to come out and stumble upon something that they call discovery. I'm not undermining the guy who's discovered himself. But there's a lot
Hmm.
of background, like as Newton said, I I stand on the shoulders of I see far because I stand on the
Hmm.
shoulders of giants.
Right. Right.
It is now believed that he said that in a very in a very sarcastic sense
Okay.
to his fellow scientists. But
Okay.
for what it is in the received wisdom of the world, that is
Right.
what Sir Isaac Newton said. That let's use that meaning here. Okay,
Right.
where it every discovery, every effort, every great accomplishment has a lot of work behind it.
Hmm.
Chandrayaan, for example, we don't know the names of all the great scientists, all the
Yeah.
fantastic people that worked
Hmm.
on them, unless we get into the details. But we know
Yeah.
it's a process. It's not an overnight thing that we put a
Right.
we put a rover on the moon,
Correct.
uh, right? It
Yeah.
failed, but it still was a great, you know, a great feat of technology accomplishment
Right.
for them.
Yeah.
I'm sure
And
they're going to do it. Yeah.
yeah, and speaking about the process, if we look at the process of education, especially in the STEM fields which you are dealing with,
Yeah.
uh, we of course have a very industrialized approach towards education. The education system is largely a template driven from the industrial age
Yeah.
times, and it is as for reasons that you've very well explained so far, it's a complete misfit in today's context, and also it is not strategically aligned to where we want to be as a nation, be self-reliant, and especially in the current geopolitical turmoil, it's obviously it underscores the importance of individuals and societies to be self-reliant. So this sort of education template doesn't take us in that direction. So coming back to the process-related aspect of it, uh, how is it, and what is it that you are doing in your own venture and initiatives around STEM education that will fix the process? So can you talk a little bit about that as
Sure.
we try and round off the conversation?
See, I think what I want to do is to actually provide uh, uh, provide a platform, uh, provide an education where the students have an opportunity to work on projects and experiments.
Okay.
Uh, so where students have hands-on experience, And one of the things that really inspired me to do this is, although it started before COVID, COVID really uh, uh, confirmed that what I do is really what is needed, especially after all these many coding platforms came into picture, mostly on app development and all that. As to what we really need to do, develop innovators, and what we really need to develop products. What kind of a education that we need to adopt in order for us to have students who can build things.
Mhm.
Uh, who really, what we need is students who really understand the subject inside out. Okay, and they just don't. For example, if they're learning about the Newton's law of gravity, you know, it should not end up after the exam that he doesn't even know, doesn't even remember the statement, or just the
Mhm.
statement lives on in his mind like a Cheshire cat.
Mhm.
Okay, gleefully smiling, he remembers only the statement, not the essence of it.
Right.
So, the idea behind the program that I am actually uh, setting up is it's to carry out a series of experiments and projects by building devices and by exploring gravity and by exploring thermodynamics, by exploring uh, planetary orbits computationally, and by building things with electronics. Okay, using sensors and actuators to use your hands as well as your. It isn't that one has to have a very deep understanding of what one is learning about, what one is doing about. What we uh, what we need is somebody who really has explored the field, explored a topic that he is that he's studying in a way that becomes a part of his natural memory. By that, what I mean is, if you learned swimming in childhood or any point in your life, or
Mhm.
tennis or any sport for that matter, and you're not practiced it for decades, and
Mhm.
you throw yourself into water or somebody throws you in water, you will come back swimming. That is for sure.
Right.
We may drown because of cramps, but you will not. But otherwise, if you don't have cramps, if you are a healthy person, you swim back to the shore because you know we have this what's called as a muscle memory.
Very true.
Okay. And what's important here is when you're doing something kinesthetically, when you're doing something with your hands, while also you're applying, you naturally apply your mind. You know, the judgments that you make in solving the problems they are very innate. They step naturally from your thought processes. You generate the ideas come naturally and spontaneously to you.
Mhm.
Okay, nobody need to tell you. Suppose say you have a particular you're coding a particular problem in prime numbers. Okay, and you want something to happen. You want a particular page to open when a prime number with certain characteristics actually enters that number. Is entered. I'm talking about crypto. I'm talking about
Yeah.
cryptography. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, uh, the program to do this can be quite simple. Can be quite simple. But for a child to discover about prime numbers, for a student to discover about prime numbers and how they are used, and how the secrets are the modern cryptography works,
Mhm.
is not something. How is it done today? You finish your engineering, you forget all about your prime numbers, you forget about everything, and then you start, and then you find that the security market has got a lot of opportunity, and so you do a
Right.
3 months course into it, and then you get into it. I think this is the way. I've not explored this area, but I'm telling you.
Yeah.
But here is something that's actually very fundamental to your education. That is very fundamental to your
Mhm.
knowledge of mathematics. That we study about numbers in high school level, right?
Yeah.
But that's something that we want to go and pay for in an institute to get a job after 4 years of engineering or 3 years of a BSc or whatever it is. So what I'm saying is the school education or the college education, while it is relevant, the topics are relevant, we are not hammering in those points, the hammering in those ideas and concepts, hammering through proper projects and experiments, wherein students they develop insights into that area. How to kind of imperative knowledge rather
Mhm.
than fact-based knowledge. What is a
Right.
prime number? A number which is not divisible by itself, and any other number is called, which is only divisible by itself,
Mhm.
and one is called a prime number. So that's where we end up.
Right.
There isn't a process of discovery, but
Yeah.
computational thinking, programming can help a student to develop this kind of a to develop this kind of. Similarly, let's talk about this is applicable to at any level. Let's talk about gyroscopes.
Mhm.
If you simulate, if you write a program and to simulate the work of a gyroscope that's used in shipping or in ships to control the control the pitch yaw, the rolling of the ship, or the similar effect in aerodynamics, and
Mhm.
it's called inertial guidance. How do we simulate, or in optics and lasers, whether we want to read and forget it for the exam, or whether we
Yeah.
want to model it,
Mhm.
whether we want to conceive of ways, whether we want to put optics and sensors and set up a simple experiment to test the divergence of your optical ways that you have actually studied in your ninth standard optic class, or whichever the grade that you are studying in your optics,
Right.
and encode that in the form of any computer language that you're reading, that you're learning, so that you not only are picking up a skill to do that, but you're also developing that skill wherein you can deploy the knowledge that you're studying, that you're
Mhm.
learning, and it will remain with you for the rest of your life. You cannot lose this knowledge because you have done it.
Right.
This comes from an approach called Constructionism by Simon Papert, who was an MIT mathematician and one of the original pioneers of AI. And Simon Papert is also famous for the Logo programming language.
Mhm.
It was used in the 1960s and 70s for children. And
Right.
Mindstorms, the Lego Mindstorms, is
Yeah.
inspired by his book called
Mhm.
Mindstorms. His book is called Mindstorms. So this approach is called. So it's a very kinesthetic approach where you're using your hands as well as your mind
Mhm.
to develop the concepts. This is not something that you can use. So my my work in STEM is completely based on that. It is
Mhm.
about how do we explore every topic in science and mathematics, every topic in at one level, where so that
Mhm.
students have a good understanding of this, a good understanding of the subject they are learning about, not just understanding but imperative knowledge.
Mhm.
If you solve problems, you will understand the subject, but that understanding may not last for too long, and even if it lasts, you will not develop a working knowledge of it.
Right.
Okay, you're a chartered accountant, Rajiv, and what differentiates a chartered accountant? You're also an MBA,
Right.
but what makes a chartered accountant really stand apart in its
Mhm.
education? 3 years of training,
Correct. Absolutely.
practical training. They are forged in. They're baptized in fire. Okay,
Correct. Yeah.
can you ever find a chartered accountant who doesn't understand his tax laws? I think it's
Right.
almost impossible to find a chartered accountant easily.
Yeah.
To I think why is it that when something like chartered accountancy can be as practical and as experiential
Mhm.
as it is,
Right.
I think something engineering, when we're dealing with the machines, when we are dealing with life itself, engineers build the medical equipment, the
Mhm.
medical instrumentation,
Yeah.
which engineers really create the world. You know,
Yeah.
an education like that, which is, why is it only theoretical? Why is it that the practical component in education, in engineering education or in physics education,
Mhm.
is so neglected? And why is it that it only comes when you actually start engineering?
Right.
And why
Yeah.
is it that even after you start your engineering, why is it that you still are doing only for, you know, your practical component is almost never really aligned with your theoretical component. Why
Right.
why even have the names practical and theory? We're doing engineering, that's all, and it means that we have. Why not we actually break? I think all theory comes from practical, right? It's a different
Right.
thing that there are subjects
Hmm.
like theoretical physics which offer real insights into, you know,
Yeah.
but the everything needs to be falsified in the sense that at the end of the day, every theory also will have to stand the experimental scrutiny or the
Right.
practical scrutiny.
Yeah.
Now, students are not getting an opportunity to stand themselves to that scrutiny
Right.
throughout their 16 plus years of education.
Hmm.
Now, if they are freshers and babies when they have actually entered a job, then what kind of a candidate the employer is getting? So now employers, what they have done is what they do, they train these people for that particular job that they need.
Correct. Yeah.
That never ever be can never ever be broad enough
Yeah.
because all the practical training, all those insights, the theoretical as well as the practical insights that they should be getting through 16 years of education have been subdued in
Right.
a process where you have objectified the marks, where you have objectified the examination, and you don't have any other goal than scoring the finest of marks,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah,
yeah,
and in fact, this is precisely the reason why a lot of people struggle in
yeah,
their mid-career when they are wanting to change their tracks, because the only thing they have practical experience is in one application of
yeah,
the entire theory or the knowledge that they have. So, for example, if you are, let's say, a telecom engineer and you just understand one, platform on the telecom side, then that underlying technology becomes obsolete, or that programming environment becomes obsolete, and after 10 years you are completely at a loss, and you find that you're not able to switch tracks or learn something new. It is
yeah,
precisely because of the reasons you're mentioning. So the effects are not just in your first job, or getting to your first few years. The effects are so much more profound, and I've seen this in real life with mid-level and even senior level executives struggling when the ground beneath them kind of shifts, and they have to make a change. They are just not able to. And the more I listen to you, I think the reason becomes obvious.
yeah,
Looking at myself, as a chartered accountant. In fact,
yeah,
recently we published another conversation with a
yeah,
chartered accountant, or rather a cost accountant, who's into the business of continuous learning. So they
yeah,
not only go through that 3 years of practical experience, but it becomes their business to keep learning and getting professional certifications right through their career. Whether they are 40 years, or 30 years, or 50 years of age. I think that's kind of at least the mental model that at least all knowledge oriented professions should be adopting if they have to really make a mark. And I think in that respect, what you're doing, and bringing about kinesthetics and
yeah.
learning by doing sort of model, that sets the tone for their entire life, not just for those 2 years of plus 2 or 4 years of engineering.
Exactly, exactly. And I think this has to start from a very young age.
Yeah.
And this has to start from a very young age because students, there's always this debate about, when when people finish when kids finish their plus two, there's
Mhm.
always this debate with the parents about what subject they have to take.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know, we all do that, and a lot of students actually do come to me asking, what subject should I take? Which subject has got a lot of value? Sometimes I feel obligated to give them a very objectified answer, although I don't like that.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think my idea in this one is, discover for yourself.
Right.
Okay, I tell them because they don't really have the time to discover for that anymore. They really will
Mhm.
have to get into it. But what I
Right.
do say is, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
you read up a little bit and see, which branch is which. I explain to them a
Right.
bit. But regardless of what branch you can do, you are an engineer.
Mhm.
At the end of
Right.
the day, you are a problem solver. And
Mhm.
today's world works in a cross-disciplinary setting.
Right.
There are no, uh, there is no biology and physics. There is no physics and engineering.
Right.
Everybody is doing, everybody has to know a bit of everything else. and you have
Right.
to think. You have to have that cross-disciplinary knowledge if you have to thrive and excel in the with the and really grab the challenge and really face the challenges
Right.
and grab the opportunities that come your way.
Right.
If, you really want to have a routine career and you want to have fall in place and be a follower of the things and consumer of what things like you know
Hmm.
obviously you might have one of the finest workers in your office working on Finacle or a
Hmm.
Tally, these are the accounting software. Correct me if I'm wrong. You might
Hmm.
have, but
Yeah.
that's fine. If people have chosen to do that, but they can't be the creators of if a new platform is released.
Hmm.
If a new platform is released, they will have to learn that again,
Right.
right? But
Yeah.
in Tally, even as a non-coder or a non-software person, I think you will have a better insight into what a Tally is about and how a
Right.
better Tally can be designed. You don't have to be a coder for that.
Right.
Until
Yeah.
creation of
So
Tally, the coding comes only in the end, right?
correct. Yeah,
Okay, of course,
it's only the application
the
layer,
expression.
on top of the fundamental layer. But
The fundamental.
there has to be something in the fundamental layer, or as we call it, the functional layer,
Yeah.
for the application layer really to take shape.
Yep.
And yeah, I think this simple aspect, a lot of people just tend to forget, and they think that this is the be all and end all, because this is what is really seen in the industry in a big way. But
Yeah, that's we are giving a very one size fits all kind of a solution
yeah, yeah.
to all
So
the students. Yeah.
yeah, and in that respect, and coming to our last segment on discussing about the future, and kind of putting you into a spot, and in terms of crystal gazing, and what the future of education will be like, and what is it that we need to do. You spoke about multidisciplinary, which is also one of the cornerstones of the new education policy
Yeah.
that has been released a couple of years ago, and that for the first time, I believe, in the history of independent India, speaks about multidisciplinary education, and
Yeah.
all these silos, the functional silos or the technical silos, nomenclature, etc., go out of the window, and people are free and at liberty to pick and choose what they want to explore and deal with. So how do you think the future is going to take shape, and what is it that people who are at various stages of their education or educating their kids, what should they be worried about, and what should be their primary focus?
I think the primary focus for any parent, with their kids going to school or college, should be that how oriented they are towards the industry. And my this one, if they take my advice, my this one, do not focus too much on marks,
Hmm.
because marks is not something they'll have to study well. It doesn't mean that
Right.
they can throw every test for a toss, and
Hmm.
they should not be compliant with their homeworks and all that. That's after all a part of the job. But do not pressurize them to get the 90s and 80s and hundreds, and do not pressurize them for marks, because I don't think the industry is looking for that kind of people anymore.
Right.
Maybe if your kid wants to go for an IAS or something, that's still valid. But I don't think the industry is looking for people with skills, people with
Right.
knowledge, people with
Hmm.
creativity.
Right.
Today's and if you really want your kids to actually excel and thrive in the digital transformation,
Hmm.
uh, you know, give him enough opportunity and freedom to quench his curiosity of knowledge. You know,
Right.
do not buy him electronics kits, buy him robotics kits, buy him books that he can read on, not
Right.
just watching Discovery Channel and National Geographic.
Right.
Okay, uh, let him dip into sports, let him dip into music, let him build musical instruments, let him
Right.
tinker around with Arduino,
Hmm.
let him play around with mathematics, let him solve puzzles in Sudoku, and
Right.
let him learn coding. There's nothing wrong with learning coding. Coding after all,
Right.
but encourage them uh, to uh, create. Suppose say you send your child to learn coding. Do not
Right.
send him because Python has an opportunity and Python is the language of the future. It is
Right.
not a language of the future.
Correct.
There are no languages of the future.
Correct.
Okay, it is
Yeah.
because the next question generally that comes to me when I say Python is the language of the future, then people do ask me, then, oh God, okay, these guys, so what should I, what's the
Right.
language of, there are no language of the future.
Right.
Maybe some other language will come or some other language will not come. Python is a
Yeah.
great language, by the way. I have nothing against it. I use it
Right.
extensively. But if he is going to learn Python or Rust or Julia or C double plus, any number of
Right.
uh, terrific number of knowledge that are of languages that are available, you ask him, what have you done with that knowledge? What have you done with that skill?
Hmm.
Can you create a simulation for the solar system?
Right.
Can you create can you create an internet of a simple internet of things? It doesn't have to be in a framework like an AWS or anything. It can be
Right.
like a simple, you send an email from anywhere, from any computer, and
Hmm.
turn on the lights in my bedroom. Can I do that? Or to
Right.
turn on the air conditioner? Can I do that?
Hmm.
Okay, is it developing the working knowledge of it?
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
At least, send an email and turn a LED light on, with an
that's
hardware
right.
kit.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So is it developing a working knowledge of it? Okay,
Hmm.
is it developing a working idea of it that he
Hmm.
can make it workable?
Right.
Not just coding. I've seen a lot of parents. They say my son has learned Python already. He's
Hmm.
got so and so certification. He's done this. Now
Right.
next he plans to learn. What do you say?
Yeah.
I don't really have anything to say on that. Honestly, what
Yeah.
I would tell him is, please continue to learn, please continue to practice Python and solve more problems. If
Correct.
you're only 14, keep solving the problems in Python until you're 20 years of age.
Yeah.
Okay, when you need to learn a new language, it automatically presents yourself to you, and
Right.
necessity is the mother of invention. You can always learn. Not that I'm discouraging you from learning, but
Right.
you have learned a Python or you learned any text-based language. I'm talking about not
Yeah.
the not those languages for children that some coding platforms. They are no doubt they are very good there. They are not
Right.
after all Scratch and such.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Like,
mean,
these
correct.
are these were developed by the MIT and
Yeah.
with a particular purpose. So they do fulfill the purpose for which they became written. But for a serious learner, for somebody who is already into some serious maths in the high school level with algebra and trigonometry and all that, uh, if they've done the thing. So this is how look at problems from a design thinking point of view. Let them
Mhm.
look at it from a computational thinking point of view. Look at it from a problem. Challenge them. Intrigue them with problems. Intrigue them with challenges.
Right.
Create a curiosity. Create a
Mhm.
opportunity. Show them something that will say, okay, how was it done?
Mhm.
Can I prompt him in a way
Right.
where, you've done Python, why don't you do this? If you're
Right.
already a software engineer, take a problem from your office and present to him, of course, curtail it for whatever uh, uh, it's not to be shared, then show it to him, present it to him as to what, create
Mhm.
analogs and
Right.
say, okay, can you solve this problem? Can you simulate a solution for this problem at least? you
Right.
know and let them if they have already learned Python, don't objectify it and say, okay, I have done the language, now I'm ready to first search for the job. This is what,
Right.
in that case, there is absolutely no difference between you picking up one skill after the other without any, it's just a collection of certificate. It becomes, you're never letting your knowledge and skills to season themselves,
Right.
so they remain like that. They just stagnate, and they slowly deplete. They atrophy. Muscle atrophies
Yeah.
when it's not
Right.
used.
No.
Knowledge also, when you don't deploy it, when you don't use it, it
Yeah.
just atrophies. It doesn't
No.
remain with you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And in fact, while you speak of languages of the future, who knows, what we are doing in the future? I, for one, believe that we may not even have to, write the syntax and remember the syntax,
Perhaps, yeah,
because all that will probably become machine generated.
yeah.
And what we will probably need to do is think of scenarios and do the what if sort of thinking, which can be fed into these algorithms or the machines, and the rest of the things will all become largely machine driven or automated, or through intelligent automation they will be kind of enabled. So I think as human beings, there are some core competencies that we have, and we need to play to our strengths rather
Yeah.
than succumb to what we are seeing around us. I think
Very,
that's the biggest
exactly. That's
takeaway.
one point again, Rajiv. Because as you just rightly said, tomorrow we might have no code solutions. No code solutions are already becoming,
Very popular.
very popular. No doubt, not all problems can be solved by no code, but
Yeah,
they are increasingly very. There are low code solutions where you can also do coding apart from,
yeah,
these are hybrid solutions. The thing is, what reigns supreme is your ability to create.
correct.
What matters is how you excel in the era of this kind is when something is already given to you. Is because what do you create the as a creator you are looking at what you need to add a layer over it. Okay, so how do you do that? You need to
Right,
be able to add to that. Suddenly, a skill is taken away from you because it's automated, and now what else you do? So
right,
if you are only a language expert, then that's not something that
right,
really. So that's my way of thinking is don't really focus on actually learning the detailed aspects of a language. That will come automatically and naturally. When you encounter a problem, you go to discover it yourself.
right,
But understand the
right.
fundamental concepts of how the language syntax works and
Mhm.
how the
Logic layer
computation
works.
how the
Yeah,
computation thinking really is takes place, and how we move in a series of logical steps to arrive at a problem. Think
right.
out of box. So this is how the parents really will have to uh, uh, get their children to mold themselves into.
Right.
They're really
Yeah.
serious about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to reiterate, what we've said earlier, this is not just something that we do for the short run, but it is a skill that and a faculty that will help them right throughout life, even at mid-career crisis sort of stages, or whenever
Sure.
the world is going through any sort of, disruption, which I'm sure we will see, a dime a dozen in the near future, the way
Yeah.
the world is moving. It's
Yeah.
often said that the pace of change that we see today is the fastest that we have ever seen until now, and
Yeah.
probably the slowest that we will ever see going forward into the future. So
Perhaps. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
probably where we are.
We are
Only
seeing
time
that in
will
India, isn't it? India is a very
Yeah,
slow country, but we are
yeah,
seeing now the fastest change of ever since I think since 2014. You've seen a very rapid change in the way the education system has changed.
yeah, absolutely. And it's high
So
time that we
look at the
change and
number of
we
changes that have been brought up. Very positive changes.
yeah.
There have been some.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and these changes are not just just in terms of modernization, but it's a
No.
blend of adopting modern as well as blending it with the traditional, which
With the
is
tradition.
the best part, because we've done a lot of mindless things in the name of becoming progressive and
Yeah.
at the cost of sustainability, which you kind of started off talking about. So we
Yeah.
kind of come back full circle to sustainability,
Yeah.
and
We're
yeah, what
making the
we
education sustainable.
yeah,
That you're really giving a meaning to the education and a purpose to it, because until now the education has only been about it's only been about uh, about writing exams, training
yeah,
people for
it's a
writing
it's a
exams.
means to an
That's what
end. It's just a means to an end and a gateway to better admissions and better jobs, and
that's what exactly.
nothing more than
Yeah.
that. So wonderful, Prem. Thanks a lot for
Thank
this
you, Rajiv.
conversation, and
Thanks.
I'm sure it will help people put the entire education system and the process of education and learning into perspective, because we often go through the motions and like everybody else, we go with the flow. We go around our lives becoming consumers of content and education rather than becoming creators. We kind of lose our childlike curiosity somewhere along the way as
Yeah.
the burden of education system and jobs and careers kind of weighs down upon us. But thanks for illuminating our audiences and showing them the way, and hopefully this will inspire a lot of people to approach education in the right way and make learning fun and experiential, so that it stays with them for life rather than just being a means to an end.
Hopefully, Rajiv, I'm looking forward to that as well.
And all the best for your venture, and
Thanks a
for
lot.
taking STEM education to the level and platform that it truly deserves. All the
Yeah.
best.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
All
Thanks
right.
for
Thank
having me
you.
on the platform. And thanks for
Yeah,
the wonderful discussion. Thank you. Thanks for
our
that.
pleasure. And the discussion is captured in a post, and you will find the links in the description below to the post, which captures the discussion and
Sure.
also has this video. So thank
Brilliant.
you once again.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye. Bye.